Hello and welcome back to my channel and to my 3 monthly roundup of the best films I've been discovering lately. Now, 3 of the best films I've seen over the last few months have been David Cronenberg's The Shrouds, Wim Wenders' Perfect Days and Hong Sang-soo's What Does That Nature Say to You? But I've already discussed those 3 films at length in my amazing Best Films of the 2020 So Far video, which I'll give a link to below. They all made that list because they're all fantastic. So this is a roundup of the other films I've been watching over the last few months. And we're going to kick off with a bevy of really good horror movies. First of all, 2 folk horror movies. The first is Enys Men by Mark Jenkin. Now, I don't know if you've come across Mark Jenkin. A few years ago, there was this big hoo-ha about his debut film, a film called Bait. Everyone will tell you it's brilliant. I thought it was crap. I thought it was kind of some sub-Nick Rogue load of old toss set in Cornwall. But he's come back, and when I heard about Enys Men, I thought, you know what, I know it's supposed to be folk horror, and I like folk horror, but I'm not going to watch a film made by that guy. So I avoided it for about a couple of years, and then I finally got round to watching it, and I gave it 5 stars on Cinema Paradiso. I thought it was fantastic. Now, the thing about Enys Men, before we get excited, is it's not really a folk horror film. It's got elements of folk horror. It's got some spooky bits and some visions in it. But it's not really a folk horror film. It's really, fans, hauntology. Psychogeography. Okay, what the hell am I talking about? Well, hauntology is a fancy word. You can look it up on Wikipedia. And it means the evocation of a past that feels like you remember it, that feels real, but which never actually existed. There's a wonderful CD label called Ghostbox, and it's modern electronic musicians, and they're making electronic music that feels like the electronic music of the 70s or the 80s, like, you know, the introductions to children's TV programs, or, you know, public information programs, stuff like that. And there's something about the public information film, about Enys Men, right? It's filmed on a very grainy stock that makes it feel like from the 1970s. The use of colour, the use of mise-en-scène and the kind of props and everything is very 70s. And the whole film seems to recall that era of the classic folk horror movie. The whole film is a haunted film. Right, so it's about a woman, she's on an island, and she seems to be some kind of researcher. She's completely alone in this tumble-down cottage, and she goes out every day, and she looks at this odd plant, a very artificial prop, and she's checking its growth day by day and marking it down in a book. But all the time, she or we seem to be having visions of the past of the island. It's an island haunted by itself, by its own history. So again, this idea of hauntology. So it's again, this psychogeography. What psychogeography is the psychology of a place. And that's what Mark Jenkin is interested in. He was interested in that in Bait, about his, you know, his world of Cornwall that he comes from. And in this, it's about rediscovering the history of Cornwall, the tin mining, you know, accidents off the coastline, through visions, through feelings. You know what this film reminds me of more than anything? You know how some days there's nothing to do, you know, you talk to the wife and say, what should we do today? You say, well, let's go to a museum. You know, you go to, you know, the tram museum or the pencil museum at Crike, you know. And you get in the mood, don't you? You think, oh, I'll go and learn something and improve myself. So you pay your money, you go into the museum, and what's the first thing you come across, right? It's a bloody film, isn't there? That little film, you know, there's a little room, and there's 2 little benches, and there's a film to watch. And you're not really in the mood for a film, you're in the mood for a museum, but you feel you have to watch the film, don't you? And you go in and you sit on the bench and you feel a bit self-conscious and you sort of like looking around like that. And the film's always halfway through when you get in. Well, Enys Men is really a kind of posh, well-directed version of those movies. It's not so much a horror film as a sort of tone poem of that Cornish countryside, of the sky, the birds wheeling through the sky, the landscape, its flora and fauna, the objects left behind by man that tell its sort of history, and then the hidden history that comes through visions. It's like an elaborate museum film telling you about Cornish history, but directed by a master. And I loved it. I loved its 70s-ness. I loved its textures. I loved that grainy photography. I love the feeling of being back in that world of the sort of 70s ghost story. It's a very odd film. It's very slow. It may not be to everyone's taste, but I'd say give it a try. Another folk horror film that I came across recently, which again isn't really folk horror, it's more folk than horror. It's a 1982 film. It's been released on the BFI Flipside label, an excellent Blu-ray label. It's called The Outcasts. It was made in 1982. And with the help of some money from Channel 4, it was the first wholly Irish production made in Ireland for 30 years. Interestingly, the previous all-Irish production had been featured Cyril Cusack, the sort of John Gielgud of Irish acting, a wonderful puckish actor. He also appears in this film. He was very proud of that fact. He's very good here, very subtle performance. But I say an all-Irish production, but I think the writer-director is English. His name is Robert Wynne Simmons. And the interesting fact about him is that he was the writer of the classic British folk horror Blood on Satan's Claw, though this film is a lot more subtle and a lot less gory, for those of you who know that movie. As I say, it's really a folk tale with elements of folk horror. And it's a classic story. It's set pre-famine Ireland, and it's set in a remote village, so it's pretty tough life, you know. And there's a family, a farming family, and the younger daughter in the family is, what's the politically correct term these days? A bit simple-minded. Probably the wrong thing to say, but there it is. But she seems to have intuition, you know. And the whole village is frightened of this guy called Scarf Williams or something. Scarf Michael, I think his name is. And he's kind of like their bogeyman figure. But as you come to understand through the film, he's really just this poor man who was left for dead. And he's kind of come back to haunt them. And she and Scarf Michael become friends and acquaintances and eventually lovers. And that means that she's outcast from her family. And it builds to a very haunting, very sad ending, which I won't spoil. So it's a film about intolerance, it's a film about ignorance and superstition. But what I loved about it was, first of all, I loved the way it looked. Again, going back to this grainy film, you know, I grew up on those BBC Ghost Stories for Christmas, which I've done a video about. And I loved the look of that slightly crappy film stock. You know, this film was made on 16mm and it was blown up to 35mm at the cinema. And it gives it a very, very grainy look. If you like the sort of slick look of modern films, you won't enjoy this movie. But I love that feeling. You really get the texture of the countryside and the changing seasons. It's muddy and grainy, and I quite like that. I think it gives it a lot of atmosphere. And I think the evocation of life in that period is brilliantly done. I love the accents as well. I love the way the dialogue is wonderful. And it's just a really evocative work in that sort of weirdy, beardy, witchcrafty, occulty bollocks genre, which I really love. If you don't like that kind of genre, avoid like the plague. Now, two other horror films that I caught up with, which surprised me. The first is The Flesh and the Fiends. For some reason, this was a sort of 1960 Hammer-type film, directed by John Gilling, who did the wonderful double bill of The Reptile and Plague of the Zombies, two of my favourite horror movies. He made this in 1960, about 5 years before, but I'd never got round to seeing it. And it's a version of the Burke and Hare story, The Body Snatchers in Edinburgh, with Dr. Knox, you remember. Now, I did, many moons ago on this channel, I did a review of the brilliant Val Lewton film directed by Robert Wise of The Body Snatcher, and it'd be a fascinating double bill to put this film alongside it. This film is nastier. It's more callous. It's grittier. It's more realistic, more true to the story of what actually happened. I think it's slightly flawed in that throughout the film, Dr. Knox is played superbly by Peter Cushing, one of his best performances, and then right at the end, it tries to redeem Knox, which I don't think really works for me because he's a real sod throughout most of the movie. But the real genius of this film is Burke and Hare themselves. Now, they're played by Donald Pleasance and an actor called Rose. I'd never come across him before, but they are superb. And Pleasance, this is in an early stage of his career, is just so brilliant. It's a wonderfully blackly comic but genuinely creepy performance. You've also got Billy Whitelaw as the sort of female love interest in the cast. Amazing cast, brilliantly shot on very gritty black and white. For those of you trying to find this film, it's quite difficult to find a decent version of this film. There were lots of different versions. There was a British version. There's an American version which should be avoided at all costs because it cuts it quite badly. But there's also, available on Blu-ray, a fuller European version with more boobs. No, really, it is. It's weird. It's absolutely gratuitous. They've just got whole scenes where women are walking around without any tops on. For no apparent reason, really. It's very odd. But that's probably the most complete version you can find now. So there you go. The fourth film I want to talk about today, another horror film, was recommended to me by one of you guys, a subscriber. I forget who it was. I apologise for this. It's a British film from about 2016. It was a debut film by a guy called Liam Gavin. He wrote and directed it. And of course, he's directed absolutely nothing since. That's the story of the British film industry in a nutshell. But it's actually rather good. It's called A Dark Song. Now, it's a two-hander, right? Now, I'll tell you the story of the film, right? This woman has lost her child, right? And she's in terrible grief. And so she decides to go through an occult practice to speak to her son again. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, God, Mike, this is one of these dreadful modern horror films with emo. It's all a metaphor for grief. I know what you're thinking, right? So then she hires this guy. A wonderful performance by Steve Oram, who seems to specialise now in playing these kind of really icky, horrid characters, blackly comic characters. And he's an occultist who's hires himself out for these kind of things. And what he does is, he says, you've got to go and get a house in the country in the middle of nowhere. We'll hole up in it for months, and we'll go through this endless ritual, and I will tell you what to do. You'll have to obey every single command. And you think, oh God, here we go, I know where this is going. It's going to be some kind of film about toxic masculinity, some bloke imposing himself on a woman, etc., etc. So you're 20 minutes in, you think, oh God, I know where this is going, right? Now, what's interesting about the film is, it kind of goes down both those routes. Both those very predictable routes, the toxic masculinity route and the grief route, but it plays with them. And then at the end, it's very bold. Some people might not go with it and I might reject it, but I really admired it for the fact that it keeps going. It doesn't end with the predictable, nice, squared-off story. It really goes for the jugular. And I admired that. And I liked the journey because the two actors, Catherine Walker and Steve Oram, are excellent. I mean, a film like that depends on its actors. And they're really good. They really sell it and they're really good together. Steve Oram is very, very funny and horrible in it. And actually, it's one of the best sort of occult movies I've seen in quite a long time. I thought it was very good. Try it out. It's not had much of a reputation, but it's really worth seeking out. Now let's turn to a genre that I don't really like. I love horror movies, but I don't like sword and sandal epics, biblical epics. God, they're a bore, aren't they? But recently, I saw an interesting addition to that genre. It was made in the 60s, just after Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor in Cleopatra. It was made in Poland. Yes, Soviet-era Poland made a biblical epic. And it was made with all the things that you expect. Casts of thousands, right? So the first shot, it's very beautifully done, actually. It starts with these dung beetles fighting on this bit of sand over this bit of dung. And then you cut to some bloke looking at it in extreme close-up. And the guy runs back. The camera's tracking back, through lines and lines and lines of men. Not CGI, real extras. So it's really epic. It's setting, look, we're doing this for real. We're doing this Hollywood style. And you have battle scenes, and you have everything that you expect in this sort of epic type thing. There's love stuff. I mean, quite kinky stuff. When the lead character, the Pharaoh, the son of the Pharaoh, he gets seduced by the high priestess in the local temple, and it's full on. Quite surprising for a Soviet-era movie. And the thing is that I absolutely loved it. I thought it was fantastic. And it wasn't just because it was from a different country, a different culture. It's made by a director called Jerzy Kawaleritz, who was a well-known art house director in Poland, directed Mother Joan of Angels, Night Train. He's a director I'm starting to discover, and I think he's quite brilliant, actually. And what is interesting about Pharaoh, it's about the son of a Pharaoh. The Pharaoh is coming to the end of his reign, and the son wants to throw off the sort of monopoly of power amongst the high priests. So it's the state versus religion, really. And what I found interesting about this film is it's not Hollywood in the sense that it's not a soap opera. What it's primarily interested in is the mechanics of power. How a state organises itself, how people manoeuvre around each other for power. That's what it's really interested in. And it's very intelligent. It's also strikingly well filmed. I mean, Karelowitz is a brilliant director. There's a battle scene in it where you follow the men, pushing through the sand and the sand dunes. And you can hear their heavy breathing. And then they come into they have the battle, and then they come away again, you just see all the dead. It's so much more powerful than, the kind of grandiloquence of the Hollywood productions. I thought it was a great movie. It really shocked me. It really surprised me. I just tried it for something different, and it really overwhelmed me. I thought it was quite brilliant. So if you fancy something a bit different, a Polish biblical epic, Pharaoh. It's based on a really important Polish literary novel, and which was written in the late 1800s, which I'd never heard of. I feel very ignorant. I think it was by a guy called Proust, if I remember rightly. So it's well worth checking out. Very interesting movie. Now, many people who've watched this channel over the years will have heard me banging on about my favourite films and favourite directors. I'd just like to talk a little bit about what is your ideal cinema. If you really had to pick a kind of film which you think, oh yeah, that's what I want cinema to be. I know that there are so many different kinds of wonderful cinema, but if there was one type of film that you thought, this is what I'm in it for, what would it be? About a month ago, I finally got round to watching a film I've been chasing for years. It's a film called Fidanzati. It's translated in various ways. I prefer the title The Sweethearts. It's sometimes called The Fiancés, right? And it's directed by an Italian director called Emanuele Olmi. He directed it in the 1960s. Olmi started out as an industrial filmmaker, making films for the company he worked for. But then in the 60s he sort of cut free and started making fiction features. He made a wonderful film called Il Posto about this young guy's first day at work. I still think one of the best films ever made about work and the workplace. And then in the 70s, he made a film completely in Bergamesque. That's the dialect of Bergamo, where he came from, a sort of a period costume drama about working class peasant life, which is one of the greatest films of the 1970s. It's absolutely wonderful. I Fidanzati, which is the film that came after Il Posto in the 60s, is a film I've been looking for ages. And when I saw it, honestly, after it had finished, I thought, that is what I want cinema to be. For all the other cinemas and all the other films that I love, this is an ideal of film. And the film itself is so simple, right? There's a young couple. The film starts this extraordinary sequence in a dance hall where it's completely silent. Everyone just files in and takes their place. And then the music starts. It's an absolutely brilliant opening sequence. And you can tell from this opening sequence that this couple are at odds with each other. And then through a series of flashbacks, you start to understand what's happening. Is that he's got a job and he's been promoted. But to be promoted, he has to be moved from the north of Italy where he's working to Sicily. And of course she can't go with him and they'll be separated, and she doesn't want him to go, but he goes. The next part of the film is simply almost a documentary portrait of a man from the north of Italy. And of course north and south in Italy was very, very different in those days, still is, but almost different countries, different worlds. Going to this place in Sicily and just watching this man try to acclimatise himself in this very new world. Almost a documentary vignettes of life in Sicily. And it's one of the great films about a life in transition. Those moments in your life when you're between places, where you've started a new job, or you're between relationships, or you're in some kind of nowhere Twilightsville in your life. And it's so moving. And it's so moving without any kind of melodramatic ostentation. It's just a poem almost of those things in life that, just a man looking and understanding and enjoying this. And then there's a bit where his mates at night try and play a trick on him. And you're just watching this man trying to find some solace in being a little boy and playing along with the prank. Little scenes like that. And then it builds to... It goes back towards thinking about his girlfriend and how much they miss each other. And then the film, daringly, I think, goes into melodramatic territory, and two lovers, through letters, speaking to each other about how much they love each other and how much this separation has actually increased their love and their understanding of their bond for each other. Many, art house filmmakers would have thought that was a bit soppy, or it was a bit dangerous. But Army goes for it full tilt. And because he goes for it full tilt, it meshes beautifully with this simple, poetic look at his life in between. I think this is one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. I really, really love it that much. And you know what? It's so gossamer thin. It's one of those movies that's so subtle and so smooth, it almost vanishes when you think about it. Yet when you're watching it, it is cinema. I mean, I really feel that way. I really think it's one of the most beautiful, purest pieces of cinema I've ever seen in my life. You can find it on this excellent release from Radiance Films, where it's on a double bill with Il Posto. That should be in everyone's Blu-ray collection. It's fantastic. Now we're going to talk about the saddest film ever made. Honestly, I watched this film, right, and afterwards I was blubbing. I was inconsolable for at least 2 hours. This film is called Oil Lamps. Yeah, I know, it's not a great title, is it? But it's a very interesting film, and I really urge you to watch it. It's by a director that I've been discovering recently, Juraj Hirsch. He was a Slovak film director. He made a wonderful version of Beauty and the Beast in the late 70s. He also made an excellent fantasy film, sort of fairy tale film called The Ninth Heart. Oil Lamps, which he made in 1971, has also got the feel of a fairy tale about it. It's based on a novel. And it's a classic story, sort of set around the 1900s. And it's about a young woman who's very independent-minded, a bit of a tomboy in her local town. And everyone sort of looks askance at her, but she doesn't care. And her cousin, who's a rather, loose, devilish type, he's been in the army and he's learned all sorts of nasty ways. His father's farm is going downhill, it's going to seed, so he needs some money. So he decides to seduce her to get her money. So it's that kind of story, and it all goes really badly wrong. What I like about Juraj Hirsch is his films have got a fairy tale sort of melancholy and wistfulness about them. The film starts with this fantastic, I love the opening credits sequence, with these kind of book illustrations that come to life like cartoons. Beautifully done, sort of Art Deco styling type thing. I love it. And then there's a sumptuousness to this sort of period costume element, beautiful use of countryside, beautiful use of costume. But it's allied with a sort of spiky, jagged editing style. You know who he reminds me of most is Joseph Losey. So it's like you're watching a sort of fairy tale melodrama about this young woman trying to find love and happiness, but it keeps sort of punching you. It keeps, you feel comfortable, and it sort of pulls it away from you a bit. And I find that really interesting. I don't think there's any other director quite like it. And I really, really recommend this film. It's unique in its styling and in the way it makes you feel. And at the end of it, I was devastated. Another interesting figure from Eastern European cinema is Peter Sulkin. I've talked about him on this channel before. He made a film called War of the Worlds, End of Century or something. War of the Worlds, The Last Century, that's what it was called. Now, this was another film that he made. This was in the mid-80s. And it's called Obi Obar, End of Civilization. It reminds me of that Gypsy King song, do you remember? Jobi, Joba, Karadia Tekiroma, Jobi, Joba. Well, it's not that. So, back in the mid-80s, right, there was this spate of post-nuclear films. Do you remember Threads? Do you remember Threads? Of course, you can't forget it if you're British. And then there was another one with Jason Robards that came out of the States. It was always looking at what's going to happen after the nuclear war and how horrible it's going to be. And there was When the Wind Blows. Do you remember the Raymond Briggs cartoon? Well, this is a Polish version of that, right? And it's seriously grim. If you like grim, you'll love it. And of course, because it's sort of Eastern European, it's got a sort of dark sense of humour as well. So in this film, right, there's been a big bomb, big war, and they've got everyone, all the survivors, into this sort of domed city, right, and they're trying to keep civilization going quite badly. Interestingly, the whole film is told from the point of view of a secret policeman, right, and he's being used by the military authorities to sort of get the gen on what the subversives or the dissidents are up to. So he sort of knows everybody, and most of the film is following him around, chatting to people and trying to work out what the hell's going on and getting some favours on the QT sort of thing. It's a very bleak film. It's brilliantly made for a film that's completely set inside. It holds your attention. It's well paced. It's intelligent. It's very well written. It's grim. God, it's grim. And there are some genuine shocks in it, genuine twists that might get to you. But I was really impressed by it. I thought, I've always enjoyed seeing science fiction from outside that kind of English-speaking bubble. It has a very different style and feel to it. And this is a very, very good example. So check it out. Oba, The End of Civilization. Next, let's talk about Private Property. Not property you live in, but the film. Private Property is an oddball cult movie. It was made in 1960 by a writer-director called Leslie Stevens. And it's one of these films, right, that it caused a minor stir at the time because it was considered to be sexually a bit provocative for its age, a bit out there. And then it kind of got lost. It got forgotten for years, and then it got revived again, then it got lost again, and it's been revived again now, and it's been restored. And it's museum interest, it's probably not, it's nowhere near as sharp or tangy a film as it was when it was first released, but it's worth checking out, right? It very self-consciously name-checks Hitchcock at one point, and it's got the feel and look of one of those Alfred Hitchcock Presents episodes, but all made on film, on location. But it's going for something a bit more adult. So what happens at the start of the film, very intriguing start to the movie, two wastrels, two ne'er-do-wells, played by an actor I wasn't familiar with, Corey Allen, who's excellent, and a very young Warren Oates, right? And it's an interesting shot. So you're looking down from the side of a motorway onto a beach, and you can see the footprints coming out of the sea. It's like these two men have emerged from nowhere, and they crawl up onto this highway. And from the very beginning, you know that they're up to no good. They're trying to rob a gas station or whatever. And they see this beautiful young woman in her car, and they decide that they're going to get her, right? They're going to stalk her. And Warren Oates, who's never had sex with a woman before, he's going to lose her virginity with her. So what they do is they sort of follow her to Beverly Hills, to her house which she shares with her husband, her businessman husband. And they sort of watch her from the adjacent property, which is empty, waiting for their moment. And Corey Allen starts wooing her. He pretends to be a sort of local salesman and starts a relationship with her. So it's a kind of grimy, gritty story, where a sort of nasty little tale, which I won't spoil by telling you where it goes. It's quite interesting, though, the way it's filmed. I love the opening 20 minutes or so, where you constantly get these shots through a fence or the bars of a window of these two men sort of, eagerly watching this woman, and you see their hands come up and like almost paw the window. This idea of the not house looking in at the people the house, the people who've got it. And it's not so much about a sort of Hitchcockian tension. You're sort of looking at these people almost as if in a sort of experiment, a social experiment. And I suppose when it was first released, it would have had more of a sexual charge. It might seem a bit tame to us nowadays, but I find it really interesting. I thought it was very well directed, very well acted. And, for its time, quite interesting. It showed a different sensibility coming into being. Now, finally today, a documentary about bullfighting. Don't all go, don't all leave, stay there. Well, all right, I'll admit, when Albert Serra the Catalan director, who's one of my favourite modern directors, I've spoken about him before on this channel, when it was announced that his next movie was a documentary about bullfighting, I thought, you know what, Albert, I might pass on this. I mean, I lived for a year in Spain and I never went to a bullfight. I hate all blood sports. I hate all sports that use animals for amusement. But what happened was, the ICA, the Institute of Contemporary Arts, if you're near London, the ICA has woken up. And it's become a really good place to watch films. They've got a good programmer there. They're doing a whole season of Theo Angelopoulos this month. I know, exciting. And they're really showing some really good movies. And they were showing it. They'd taken a chance on it, and they were doing a release for a week. And I thought, well, I'm going to go and support them, you know. And I'm really, really glad I went and saw this on the big screen. Because I can honestly say, this movie is one of the best spectacles I've seen on the big screen in a long time. Because that's what it is. What Serra does, he's a great filmmaker. He always surprises you. I should have trusted him, right? Instead of producing a simple documentary, what he does is he gets to the basics. So the camera goes right in on the bullfighter and the bull. You don't see the audience. You don't know, all the hullabaloo around him is gone. It's just him and the bull. And you watch about 4 fights in detail, right? And if you've never seen bullfighting, it's gory. It's really difficult to watch because basically the matador and the people around him wear the animal down. They keep sticking things in, goring it. The blood comes out, and it slowly ties the beast down. And it's quite shocking to watch this film because Serrat does not stint on anything. On 3 occasions in the film, the bull gets him and slams him against the boardings on the side. I mean, I jumped out of my seat. It's really quite powerful. And to be fair to the guy, he is brave. He just gets up and says, "No, don't, leave me alone," walks on. He's got blood gushing down his thighs. But then, of course, you also see the death of the bull. Quite matter-of-factly, Albert Serra films, what they do at the end is once he's delivered that end stroke, in the bull's neck, and the bull sort of totters on its feet, the guys go in, they jab this dagger in the bull's skull, which you see, and then it's like something out of the Roman gladiatorial arena. They tie it to some horses and they just drag it, and you see all of this. So it's not pretty. But it's like Serra gets back to the principles of cinema. The sheer spectacle of cinema, the colour, the movement, the focusing in on intimate details so that you actually see his reactions to the bull. You see how brave he is, but you see they're almost in this kind of dance together. The blood and everything, the colours, it gets us right back to primal cinema. And I kind of admired Serra for that. I admired the fact that he simplified it, that he got rid of the contextualization, that he made it a pure form of cinema. And the only other thing you see in the film is the preparation before the fight and him leaving in his own people carrier. He's even got his own initials on the seats. You see him leaving in the people carrier. Those scenes are hilarious, right? So he's got his team round him, right? And they're going, "Eres el cumbre. Oh, you really killed him. You really showed him. You're one of the best." And he's going, "Really? Do you think so?" "Yes, you are amazing." Like this. It's hilarious, right? And there's another fantastic scene where he's getting ready for his big fight. And they're in the hotel room, and he's with his private dresser. So they have a dresser like major actors have dressers. And those matador costumes are incredibly tight, right? So you watch him, and he's sort of adjusting his knob in these kind of really tight body stockings. And then his dresser gets the little trousers and basically sort of hauls him in. They're sort of getting him in and sort of screwing him in tight. It's hilarious to watch, There's a sort of homoerotic aspect to it. And so what happens is that purely through looking, editing, the choice of material to see, you are pressed into not just the spectacle, but also the feeling, the texture, the aura of bullfighting, without any contextualization of fact or evidence or how what's his standing in bullfighting. Nothing of that. Nothing. He actually is one of the best bullfighters currently in the world, and he earns over €100,000 a fight. Amazing. True. But that's what I really admire about Sarah. He's not interested in the documentary aspect. He's interested in the pure cinema of it. And that's why I think this is one of the greatest films I've seen in the last 5 or 6 years. It's hard to watch, believe me, but quite brilliant, I think. Give it a try, especially if you can see it on the big screen. It's really something. So those are the movies that I really enjoyed. Just a couple of other things I'd like to mention. I caught up with some modern westerns. I saw Kevin Costner's Open Range. I say modern, it's about 20 years old now. And a TV series by Walter Hill called Broken Trail. There's some fellow western fans out there. If you've never seen them, they're quite good. And they're good because they're very traditional. They're not trying to subvert the western or try to say something clever or new. They're actually just old-fashioned westerns. And I also very much enjoy 2 films by Shinji Somai, the Japanese director, who I'm always catching up with. Luminous Woman, which you can get on Blu-ray in this country. Very odd film. Almost like an allegory about this big guy who comes from the sort of remote mountains of Japan into the city. And he's trying to woo this woman, but she's caught up in gangland business. It's very odd, but some incredible imagery. And a film with the name Lost Chapter of Snow, Passion. Why it's called that, I don't know. But that film, it's got a very, very convoluted story, but it's worth checking out if you can find it for its opening shot. That opening shot should be taught, along with all the great opening shots like Touch of Evil in the history of cinema. It's extraordinary. And it's all filmed on a set. So it's this village in Japan in wintertime in the snow. And a little girl sort of gets lost on her way back home. And a young man comes and he decides to take her in. Later there's a sort of inference that they're going to become lovers, which is a bit icky. But forget that. And it's about the early stages of their relationship, of him bringing her into her home and then him taking her out and saying he's an adopted daughter. And it's all done in this extraordinary convoluted shot across this very complex set. And it's just jaw-dropping. Absolutely amazing piece of cinema. So if you've never seen it, Lost Chapter of Snow Passion is one of those things that all filmmakers and people interested in filmmaking should watch.